Well, hello, everybody. It is so great to be back at CMS. Thank you to Alex Shirazi for inviting me to give this talk. I wish I could be there in person, but I'm really honored and excited to be giving this talk from the East Coast. And as the title suggests, I want to really focus this talk around hope. But before I do that, just quickly, I want to jump in with a little bit about me for those who don't know me. So I graduated from Stanford undergrad and became the first employee at Upside Foods, at that time called Memphis Meats. So I stayed there for about 7.5 years, left in 2023 as the director of communications. And while I was at Upside, I had the opportunity to co-found with a handful of other companies in the cultivated meat space, the first trade association for the cultivated meat industry, AMPS Innovation, and I served as its vice president before I left. Today, I am an advisor for From Fauna, which is a nonprofit focused on consumer education around cellular agriculture. And I'm a board member for Animal Place, one of the largest farm animal sanctuaries in the US. But currently, I spend most of my time as a student at Harvard Business School. I'm in my second year getting an MBA there. And so while I left the cultivated meat industry in 2023, it hasn't really felt like I left because I've been keeping tabs very closely, and I continue to be a huge supporter of the space. And what I would like to do today is talk a little bit about hope and about why, despite all the setbacks, despite this challenging environment that we're in right now, I still feel very optimistic about the future of cultivated meat. So this chart is a little bit of a cliche now in our community, I think, but it's worth repeating because what this shows is a standard hype cycle over time. And so you'll see early in the stage of a really exciting new technology that has the potential to really change things in a positive way for the world. You tend to reach this big peak of inflated expectations. And so for our collective alternative protein space, I think that was probably in 2019 when Beyond Meat had this massive IPO, and it was just an incredible sense of accomplishment, both for folks in the plant-based side, but also in the cell ag side, folks who felt like this was just the beginning for them. However, for reasons that I think we all know, that bubble burst. And I would argue we are now in a bit of an overcorrection. In 2024, we've hit the trough of disillusionment, and this is due to a number of factors, some macroeconomic, some about specific companies, some about specific challenges with technology. But I do think we will see sunnier days, and I do think we will go up that slope and get to the plateau of productivity. And so what I would like to do is spend the rest of my time, it's going to be a short presentation, but just providing some 5 reasons why I still believe in this industry. And I believe there's a lot of good reason to be optimistic for the future of cultivated meat. So without further ado, let's get started. Number one, we know that the Federal Reserve is preparing to lower interest rates. This is something that they have been signaling for a while. And they're actually meeting in about a week. And they have said that in September, this is when they're going to start lowering rates, most likely. And so hopefully what this does, economics 101, we know that as interest rates go up, venture capital funding and other sources of funding tend to dry up. And so hopefully, as we see interest rates go down, we can have increased access to venture capital, which will help some of these cash-strapped startups. Number two, in the absence of some of the venture capitalists, we have really seen the beginnings of a step up in the philanthropic world for supporting this space. So from the beginning, there's been support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, from Open Philanthropy, but also we've seen more newly hundreds of millions of dollars being donated by Jeff Bezos's Earth Fund. And also from Iron Man himself via the Footprint Coalition, we've seen some philanthropic support for cultivated meat R&D. And so this is really promising. I think there's still lots of room for additional funding for folks that are interested in supporting the space. But I think it is promising that we're seeing these alternative sources of funding, especially in a time where the macroeconomic environment is not stacked in our favor. Number three. Consumers still care. So a McKinsey study came out last year that showed that 78% of consumers still say that it's important for them to live a sustainable lifestyle, including in the goods that they purchase. That study also found that if we actually look at what consumers are buying in the market, so not just what they say, because talk is cheap, but actually where they're spending their money, we see that products making ESG claims or environment, social, and response and government claims have higher growth rates substantially than products that do not. And of course, when it comes to cellular agriculture, cultivated meat, there are lots of different ESG claims that in theory can be made once the products are fully realized. And we've seen this materialize in a bunch of different ways. So it's here in this McKinsey study in terms of how consumers are spending their dollars, but it's also there in terms of how consumers are voting. So let's just take one issue. Let's take animal welfare. These are all the states in the US that have some sort of ban or limitations on the extent to which animal agriculture operators can confine animals in tiny cages. And a vast majority of these were passed via ballot initiative. That is, the citizens of each respective state had an opportunity to directly cast a ballot and decide if they wanted to institute these regulations. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that this cuts across all different political jurisdictions. You've got red states, you've got blue states, you've got purple states. And so there really seems to be this interest in a food system that is better for all the stakeholders involved, including the animals involved. And actually, there have been some social scientists that have studied this specific question. And essentially, they have extrapolated demographic voting patterns based on who voted for these laws in California and Massachusetts, and have extrapolated those across all 50 states, and have essentially realized that, and essentially found that if this were a ballot initiative, it would pass in 49 of 50 states. Now, not every state has ballot initiatives for these sorts of questions, so it is sort of a hypothetical exercise. But I think what it does show is that this whole notion that there's a partisan angle to our food system is just not as true as the media would have you believe. And yes, there are some political elites, like folks in Florida, for instance, that are trying to make this into a culture war issue. But as it stands today, there is broad bipartisan support for building a stronger food system. And I think that's something that we should be happy about. We see it in the voting data, and we see it in the way consumers are spending their shopper dollars as well. Now, of course, we should not be naive enough, and I don't think the industry ever has, to think that the ESG claims in and of itself are enough to get consumers to buy these products en masse. We know that there are other pieces of the equation. We know that the taste needs to improve on these products. We know that scale and affordability needs to improve, and particularly in an inflationary environment we know that there are challenges, that consumers are becoming very price conscious. The good news is that inflation is going down after its peak in mid 2022. And so, what this means for us is that hopefully consumers will start to become a little bit less price conscious and a little bit more willing to spend that extra money when it comes to a product that they believe in. This is not to say that this is a general market strategy. Of course, we need to be focused with a laser focus on going down the cost curve, whether you're in plant-based world or cellular agriculture world. But it is at least one headwind that we have reason to believe might be petering out a little, which is good news. And then finally, number 5, we know that governments are backing alternative protein. And this is thanks to a bunch of different folks that have been involved, including companies, including trade associations. But in particular, I want to give a shout out to Food Solutions Action, which is a political action committee focused on building political muscle for the alternative protein space, as well as the Good Food Institute, which of course has been fighting this fight from day one. In part due to the work of these two groups, we've seen real increases in government spending to support alternative protein, including cultivated meat. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? If you think about what these governments care about, It is climate change. It is food security. It is about making sure their respective government can have a leadership position in the future of food and ag and in the future of food technology. These are all very compelling reasons why government should be supporting these industries. Now, to be clear, this is not enough. This is a ton of money, right? This is over $1 billion that has been allocated to the alternative protein space from public funding sources, but there needs to be more. And if we look at similar industries that were similarly high tech and had similar advantages in terms of meeting various government goals, they received substantially more money than alternative protein has gotten so far. But this is a very good sign and a very good starting point. Now, of course, the flip side of celebration over the fact that governments are backing all protein is we also need to be very clear and push back in areas where government can be an impediment. So one that I alluded to earlier is this craze that's happening in a couple of states in the US to actually ban cultivated meat. And I can say restricting consumer options on the market is not conservative, it's not liberal, it has no place in this country, and frankly, it is un-American. And just opposed to the sort of principles of free market access that every politician in America and Europe and elsewhere would, I think, purport to believe in. And so we need to be very clear about that, that giving consumers choice is a bipartisan, if not nonpartisan, issue. But second, it's really important that government agencies do their role in making sure these companies can see the light of day. And in particular, I think it's really important that FDA acts to quickly sort through the regulatory submissions it has in the cultivated meat space, because frankly, it is not excusable that there is this huge backlog of safety submissions. And I think if we want to support innovation in the US, if we want to maintain US leadership in the global food system, if we want to combat climate change and build up our national security, it is absolutely critical that our regulatory agencies are not needlessly holding up that progress. So I want to close with this quote from Teddy Roosevelt, and I actually saw this, credit where it's due, when I was visiting the Mission Barnes headquarters in San Francisco. And it really stuck with me. And this is one, it's a long quote, but I do want to just take a moment to read it out loud because I think it's really valuable. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. This is a quote that I think our industry should keep in mind because the reality is there are challenges we are facing as an industry. Cultivated meat, cellular agriculture, alternative protein, these are not and have never been an inevitability. And there are very serious challenges that the industry is facing. Let's not sugarcoat anything. Let's not make things seem rosier than they are. However, we need to acknowledge that we are going to receive external criticism, and that's okay. That is part of the nature of living in a free society where others are free to comment and make note of how they would do things differently. What is absolutely critical, however, is that we keep our eye on the ball and stay laser focused on the long term. It's not about notching up short-term wins. It's about building a food system that can serve the critical stakeholders, the people, the animals, and the planet that matter the most. And so I hope everybody here can sort of keep this in mind and keep some perspective. There will continue to be challenging days. There will continue to be companies making announcements of going out of business, companies that lay off employees. And I would just urge everybody to keep in mind that there are rosier days ahead. At least I believe so. And there are reasons for hope. So with that, I want to thank Alex once again for inviting me to speak at CMS. It's really been an honor and a privilege, and I look forward to hopefully seeing many of you in person soon. Thank you.